Hey listeners, make sure to check out our 2-week free trial for unlimited yoga, breathwork, and Ayurveda on betteryoga.net.
Hello, friends. Kari Harendorf here at the Better Yoga Podcast. My esteemed guest, friend, teacher is the incredible Abbie Galvin. She's the owner of The Studio in New York City, a renowned yoga sanctuary that is known as the place where your teacher goes to practice. It blends Katona yoga principles with a contemporary approach to movement and mindfulness. Abbie is a master teacher with decades of experience. She is celebrated for her innovative methodology, which integrates geometry, metaphor, and breathwork to empower students to transform their practice both on and off the mat. Known for her profound insights and dynamic teaching style, she has guided countless practitioners towards greater alignment, vitality, and self-awareness. Abbie is truly a teacher of teachers, a passionate mentor, an author, a new grandmother, and an advocate for the healing power of yoga. Abbie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off, we ask everyone, the first question is, how has your practice evolved over the years? And the question we ask everyone is, what does it look like currently?
So my personal practice is the practice that I do in the morning, and then I also do it in the evening. It takes me about 50 minutes to an hour. If I have more time, which I usually have in the morning, I slow it all down and take even longer. And what it looks like is a longevity practice that is a very specific home practice, a very specific set of poses, a sequence. I don't vary it, but it's varied anyway because every time you come to your mat, you're coming with the adaptation of whatever's going on around you. So it always feels different, but the sequence, it's like the same musical score, but I play it differently every time, but the poses don't change. The timing might change. The breath might change. I might magic square myself in every pose, or cross-reference myself in every pose, or wrap myself in the breath in every pose, or count, or try another breath technique. So it always feels different, and it's always the same.
We're going to talk about ritual when we get into it a little bit more, and I really want to delve into the home practice. But first, can you share a little bit of how you discovered yoga and what led you to Katona yoga?
What led me to yoga in general is that I was always looking for some esoteric experience, some experience that was elevating, that took me out of the everyday. And I think that I was looking for like a specialness. Like I was always looking for something that was like, not thrilling, but elevating. Something that like gave me levity, always. And, I am a practicing Jew. So I grew up in a family. My parents had been Orthodox. And they were not practicing Jews anymore. Basically, if a Holocaust can happen, there's no God. So they were like atheists, but very identified culturally as Jews as a race, not as a religion. But we went to like Sunday school that was like all about civil rights. So my parents were like lefty, and in their generation, that it was not that unusual. That they were more politically minded, and along with that came civil rights and anti-Semitism, and so the Jewish thing was not necessarily prayerful, but it was very mindful. And so I was always looking for something that elevated me out of that, I don't know, what I considered kind of mundane. And that was my reality. And so I tried lots of different, I guess, spiritual disciplines and never found anything I liked. Also, what I didn't kind of know about myself until much later was that I loved to be embodied. Like I loved to be physical. I did, we danced every day. We were, me and my two sisters and my mother went to ballet every Saturday, all day Saturday. So we were, my parents were not into sports, but they were into, I don't know, they were into the arts. They were artsy fartsy. They were culture vultures, everything classical music and everything, if it was classical, it was good. They weren't into rock and roll. They weren't into, sports were like, why would you want to do sports? Like that's for stupid people. They just like, but I loved being embodied. I loved to dance and I actually love sports. And so when I found yoga, I thought it was really, I studied with some Iyengar people. I studied with some Ashtanga people. I studied with some Kundalini people. It's just like, I didn't find anything authentic. I found these people, um, uh, I found the people in my generation who came to yoga. They were looking for something spiritual, which I was too, but I found that it attracted either people who were very damaged and were looking for yoga culture, guru culture, which I was not looking for at all. I had a father who was very formal, very paternal. He was a god, he was a doctor, and I did not want to participate in that. I had a lot of respect for my father, but I had one already. I did not need to find a guru. And also these gurus, I found them really not interesting people. I found them, they were not particularly nice. They were not compelling to me. I did not want to follow them. And that was what was available when I first started yoga. And then that kind of what yoga kind of, I don't know, I did some like, kind of like flat, lame yoga just because it was what was around. And then when I moved to Katona with my family, my husband wanted to move out of the city. So we moved to Katona because we just thought it was charming and we really loved it. And I did not like it at first. And my husband, who was a devout Catholic, loved that there was like a church on every corner in Katona. There was no temple, no synagogue, no Jewish community, nothing like that. And actually, I didn't find it like that kind of like intellectually stimulating. And so he literally went to every yoga studio within a radius of Katona because I think he thought that I was going to move back to the city and desert him. And he walked in one day to Naveen's class and he said, my wife is a very committed yogi. Can she join this room? Like he saw something in it. And she said, I'm not really taking on new students right now. And he looked across the room and his cousin was in the room. And he said, oh my gosh, that is my cousin. And her name was Abbie Galvin.
Really?
And Naveen said, that woman is my best friend. Your wife can come. And I came that very afternoon. And that was decades ago. And then Naveen and I became like,
Yeah. I never knew that story. That is hilarious.
crazy. I was, and then I kind of got to know that cousin, and we're both Abbie Galvin. Crazy, right?
I love that. I mean, I'm just fast forwarding because now I'm like, you have two Alex Sherrys, right?
Yes, that's true. That is so funny.
Oh my God. Okay. And so, all right, we'll talk about how your practice has evolved over the years because just like in Chinese medicine or in Ayurvedic medicine, it's like everything has a season. And just like your practice should evolve as you evolve, right? You're not doing the same thing in the summer as you're doing in the winter, and you're not doing the same thing in your 70s as you're doing in your 20s, right? So the practice, especially once you have a longevity practice or you've been practicing for a long time, it changes. Or as you said before, if you're doing the same longevity practice, that doesn't change, but you change. you change within it, right? And so,
Yeah.
which is
But
why
yeah,
you can stay creative even within the same structure,
of course.
right?
But my actual practice has changed. It has gotten less linear and more spherical, and it's gotten more fluent. And the more I do my home practice, actually, what I discovered um, is that the more you practice the same thing over and over again and create the patterns that allow you to be more fluent and less linear, the muscularity gives way to the imagination. And so when you do something over and over again, literally joint space opens. So instead of holding poses, you're occupying space inside. And so over the years, and the more I do my home practice, I become actually more available to myself as my body gets more fluid and the poses get more, and I get more malleable, and time becomes becomes bigger. And that is what the home practice has given me. And so pattern is everything. Time technique and time technique and real repetition of pattern is really what it's all about for me. Technique refines your competency. Repetition literally creates you. You know, if you have like 10, if you have one row of knitting, you have a row of knitting. If you have 10,000 stitches, you have a sweater, right? So the repetition of good technique creates you. It gives you your vehicle or your container or, you know, however you want to say it. It gives you the boundaries of your life, and time changes you. So good technique over time is really what has changed me. And that has been sort of the definition of my whole practice. But the home practice has really changed me because it gave me, and I've always had an interior life. You know, I love to read, I love to pray, I love to sing. I like the interiority of, that's why I like psychoanalysis. That's why I liked film. You know, I love the language of the interior. So home practice for me it was really syntonic. Like I don't see it as a discipline. It's a ritual to me. And so it changed everything about me when I discovered that.
Well, you've literally written the book, Home Practice. So yes. So for people who don't have an established home practice, or are going to come to your 5-day immersion, like, and you're going to give them your elevator speech on home practice, because for new teachers or people that think, oh, I can just go to class and that'll be my daily practice, or I can, do something else. Like, what is the gravitas of that home practice? And you talk a lot about ritualizing it, so you come there and do it every day.
Right. It's really funny. My association to what you're asking is that I do every summer like an immersion on Zoom of a home practice, and I'm going to be doing an in-person in February home practice in the studio. And I will say that a third of the time that we are talking about the home practice, what people are talking about is their procrastination.
Resisting the home practice.
I do not think that I believe that they really want to do it. Like I know they want to do it. They want to have it. But I think that a procrastination is a mood disorder. It's not a resistance to having a home practice. It is a resistance to the anxiety that comes when you start to go inside. It's when you start anything, there's this little threshold of resistance, not because you don't want to do it, it's because you don't want the discomfort. And sometimes the discomfort, the desire to change has to be greater than the familiarity of your lunar nature. And if you don't have a home practice, after a while, you are at the mercy of your habits. And so home practice gives you the capacity to have a solar nature, which is something that you teach yourself. Going to class is beautiful. It's wonderful for building community, for working on your technique, for playing with an orchestra, for working with others, for going and measuring up, of keeping up, of learning the poses. All of that is like great participation. But home practice is using your home, your body, not doing yoga at your house, but your home, your abode becomes your sanctuary. And that takes time. Because at first, some people are stiff. Some people can't do the poses. Some people can't go inside. Some people are too distracted. It is really what you're doing inside while you're doing the poses. And that's why it becomes like a meditation. Because if you're in the pose, like in a plow, for example, and you're wrapping yourself in this very specific technique that we call wraps for rapture, that if you're wrapping yourself in the breath and you're in a pose, you are using all of yourself, trying to get access to those pieces of you that are not easily accessible in other ways. In this very conscious, intentional way to go inside and have an experience and come out differently. And it is, and that's why it's so important that it's the same series of poses, same technique done on the daily at the same time on the same mat. And it is a ritual. So you're putting yourself on a grid, on a conceptual grid. And in so doing, you are not only creating myelin on the nerves, but what you're also doing is practicing neuroplasticity. That is essentially what's happening. Because I think that of all of our modalities in Katona yoga, the home practice is the one that changes you the most because of that. We track in pattern, not novelty. People raise their hand, they say, well, I listen to my body, or, I listen to see what I crave, like what I need every day. You don't change when you traffic in novelty, only when you traffic in pattern. And the repetition of pattern is where the aha is. And
Right. And that's,
it's like nature, right? If you're having a lousy winter, just know, and we do know, and it's going to happen, spring's coming. So
and it doesn't suddenly just say summer, like, oh, I just feel like I want summer, so it'll be summer now. And I love that, because when I'm listening to you speak, I'm just feeling like that is true self-care. Having a home practice is true self-care. It's not like, oh, I feel like I want to go for a manicure today, or I'm going to get my hair done. It's like, like you said, you're building the myelin. You're protecting the nervous system. You're working the nervous system. And you had said something talking about procrastination is being a mood disorder. And I know you speak very eloquently about precrastination versus procrastination. So I would love for you to drop a gem on that. But also this, well, I'll let you speak to that, but it goes back to the same tenets of Katona yoga, right? Pattern, repetition, and insight. And we don't like being uncomfortable in our culture. There was a lot of escapism, right? And a lot of like, oh, there's a pill for that. There's something else for that. But the home practice is the real remedy for our modern woes.
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that it's very hard to be with oneself. I think that we are a culture, we're a very woody culture. We are a culture of doing, of achieving, which is great. I like to participate in that. But the being has to be self-cultivated. Nobody does that without effort. And the home practice is a template for self-cultivation. So, and there's lots of ways to self-cultivate, and we need a lot of different techniques, because each technique that you learn, whether it's swimming or cooking or dancing or writing, yoga, every technique will pull out another piece of your personality. Every technique will give you the capacity to have an experience where you discover something about yourself, and then you can use it for other things. So we always say, like, you don't tune yourself to yourself. You tune yourself to great nature. So our practices are very formal, but the investment is incredibly personal, right? Like, we're always talking about formality, archetype, templates, technique. You owe it. That is the linear way to learn things. However, it's all in the service of personal investment for potential, all of it. And that's why you do any kind of self-cultivation techniques. And so, self-cultivation comes in lots of forms, but home practice is particularly self-involving. And it will give you so much, substance, volume, and it'll give you, it's a dance with your stellar nature, with your third foot, third hand, third eye. It's a dance with your implicit. Because what is the implicit? It's what we're all after. What's implicit? Love, determination, inspiration, a sense of confidence, things you don't see. But that's what we're all after. So home practice is a dance with all of that, which is our stellar nature. To learn things is our solar nature, where we learn to be appropriate and we learn good technique and we learn to get good at things. Our lunar nature is, the gifts and talents we come with, and what, that's just me, but when we put them together, that is when we develop, like, what am I doing here? Like, what's my mission in life? What's the purpose of it all? What's going to give me meaning? That's implicit. And that's what you get when you go inside, as opposed to, some people say to me, well, every morning I go and I watch the sunset. Well, that's great, but it's not an embodiment practice. And without the body, you can't really have an esoteric experience, because your body is the container for it. There has to be a seed of consciousness that is held in a container, so that we are the soil, we are the, like, we're the bookends, we're the container. Mm-hmm. Right? But the real issue is not the bookend or the container or the vehicle. It's what's the experience inside. And that's what home practice gives you. It gives you the capacity to have an interior that really gives you the stellar nature, the implicit, rather than the explicit technique of doing something well. But that really helps. And that's why we don't ask beginners, because they don't have the emotional stamina or the physical technique to be able to sustain a real practice.
Okay. You may have already answered this question, but I know that you love to talk about the implicit and the explicit, and then I want to weave it through all of your passions and talents, right? And so, in your teaching, how do you work with the implicit, the unconscious patterns, habits, and narratives stored in the body, because that's where life happens, as you said, that's our container, versus the explicit, like intentional movement or conscious thought, right? How do these two dimensions interplay in the practice of yoga?
Well, the implicit is found by virtue of the explicit set of conditions. So we very consciously set up explicit conditions to have an implicit experience. So the explicit conditions are things like, are you doing a pose well? How do you, I love the physical practice. So teaching the actual technique of the archetypal forms is key to be able to then go inside and have an experience. So you want to have, in other words, another way of saying it is that when you teach yoga, you don't teach people to, for example, hold poses. You teach people to move currency through forms. So there's always an aspect of the implicit with the explicit and the explicit within the implicit, because you can't go inside unless you have an explicit practice that's going to give you substance, volume, a vision and imagination, unless you know what it looks like. So first, everybody's going to come in and they're going to do themselves, and they're going to do you, you're just going to do what you do. But then we start to refine it, and the refinement comes with the technique of learning, like measuring the poses well, right? Measuring the distance between your feet, measuring the distance between your collarbones and your wrists, and then learning things about why that's important. Because if you don't tell people why it's important to bend your knees, or that the collarbone, wrist is the housing for the function of your lungs, they're going to do it and then go back home and do whatever they want. But if you give people a reason for doing it, and the reasons are very explicit, so you keep teaching the explicit for the purpose of having an implicit eventual experience. And that's how, it's sort of like, we used to say, you build the cathedral to house the spirit. We used to say that like 30 years ago. So things like that, you want to be able to start with technique, which is like learning to ride a bicycle. You have to pedal, you have to steer, and you have to look around. Pedal, steer, look around. Don't stop, keep going, keep pedaling. You tell everybody how to ride a bike. But eventually it's to use the bike as transportation, not to focus on the technique. That is explicit becoming implicit. Or, learning to read. We always, use the metaphor of learning to read. You first sound out letters, then you play with the sentences and you put them together, and then you have a paragraph that you can play with and learn new vocabulary words and put ideas together. But eventually it's to enjoy a great story. It's to, where does the author leave off and my experience take off? Where does my imagination and the author's intention give me an experience of like, oh, I love this character. I'm so identified. Oh, I do that too. Let me follow it to the end. I'm invested now in the story, not the technique of reading the words. That is the explicit becoming an implicit experience. And that to me is what living is. That's why it's so important to have an imagination. That's why it's so important to do things that are creative, so you can tap into that piece of yourself that's not readily available in our culture of do, achieve, succeed, find the right person, have the right conversation, read the how-to books, which is kind of stupid. Just like you want to really engage. No one can read about how to have an implicit experience. You have to set it up by explicit refinement.
And then just do it,
Uh-huh.
right? So you talked a lot. I know a big part of the practice is using metaphor, engaging the imagination. So what role does metaphor play in your teaching, and how?
Everything.
It's everything. And how because it resonates with the students. It gives them that.
Well, it resonates with the teaching because we teach formality. We teach, this is how you measure a pose. You can have all the muscle in the world, but if you can do a plank with right angles in the ankles and right angles in the wrists, it'll be sustainable. There is no pose held with muscle that is going to move currency through, open up the imagination, and be sustainable. You don't move currency, energy through muscle. Muscle is meant to hold. And that's not what we're doing. We are moving currency through forms. So, the other thing is that metaphor is very universal. And when you keep things universal and not personal, it allows other people to have their personal experience. So we always say things like, and I mean it glibly, like, we don't care about your feelings, but that's not really true. The issue is you don't focus on the feeling, you focus on the technique. And when you focus on technique and it turns out really well, your feelings will change and they'll be good, right? You'll feel happy with yourself. You'll feel good. The pose has levity. You'll feel airy. Your lungs will function better. Your kidneys will support you. Your liver will be a good filter. Your stomach will be a good processor. All things good. So you don't focus on the feeling, you focus on the technique. And for that, these ideas have to be universal ideas. So people can, so you can take an abstract concept in a grounded way so everybody can identify in some way. So if I say that, let's look at the body as a house, well, everybody has a house. Your pelvis is your basement. I get that. This is the living quarters and how you do things and how you express yourself. Everybody gets that. This, who doesn't know that a head is like, oh, imagination, intuition, cosmos up here, right? So it's very universal to say, oh, the front is potential and the back is your shell, where you house your memories. Everybody can relate to that. The left, your heart is setting. Well, that's going to be my more esoteric nature. This is the world. That's going to be do, the hand of the world, right? So people will relate to this because there's nothing you can, there's nothing in a metaphor that is arguable. It is just a universal principle. And so metaphor stays impersonal, but available for everybody to hook their personal aspect onto it. And that's why it's so important to teach that way. So you're not teaching to someone's hip that needs to be reconciled, ankle that was once broken, or shoulder that's funky. You're not teaching to that. You're teaching to giving people a template so that they can reconcile those things. So that in opening up the field of geometry, your foibles will conform to the geometric shape rather than conforming the practice to fit your foibles.
Right. Yeah, to your history.
Right, because that's how you are easy prey to injury, disease, denial. And so, you don't want to be at the mercy of your lunar nature. You want to have an esoteric experience that will reconcile the habits, compensatory skills, and whatever else you believe in. So you don't buy yourself. You use a template, you use a musical score, you use a recipe, you use a metaphor, you use things that you can bring yourself to rather than conforming the practice to suit your limitations. Then there'll always be limitations.
Right. I love that because I can see, you see it in a room and it's like, there's like 30 different breeds of dog. Or 30 different triangles. Or is that a triangle? It's not quite a triangle. It's just like, it's not personal. It's an archetype.
That's right.
And then there's a bigger experience than.
Right. So by the end, everybody should look the same.
It's the same.
But everyone's coming from their own individual thing that they do, but we're all getting to the same place, right? So, some people need to be more substantial, and some people need to lighten it up, and some people, some people need to stretch more, and some people need to open their windows, and some people need to flush their toilets, and everybody needs something else, but we're all getting to the same place.
You've spoken a lot about your love of psychoanalysis and how the body holds and tells its own story. Can you expand on how you incorporate that perspective into your teaching? I know you do a lot of body reading at the studio, and a lot of body reading is part of the practice of Katona Yoga.
Yeah. So psychoanalysis is the process of taking unconscious material and making it conscious. And so it is all about the yin and the yang of those 10,000 things, as the Chinese say. And that is what polarity is. That is what great nature versus personal nature is. That is what self-cultivation is. It is making the unconscious conscious. That's what the implicit and the explicit polarity is. It is all about the 10,000 things of the yin and the yang. And so when you start therapy, you go in and you fulfill the contract, which is basically show up on time, pay on time, tell the story of your life, right? And most people are doing is they're telling the story of their week, right? Or this is what happened, and right? And it takes a really long time to start to unpeel the onion to more meaningful, consequential, deeper material that has really formed you rather than the surface material of your daily life. For that, you need something very special. And that is, in psychoanalysis, the term is transference. Transference is the relationship that you have with the therapist. That after a while, and it does take a while, the therapist is not a good listener. The therapist is a transference object. You transfer all of your relationships onto that person. And that's why you go all the time. You go once a week. You pay the same rate. You sit in the same chair. You have the same relationship with the same therapist. It takes years. It's very much like a grid, like the home practice grid, because that is the only thing where people change over time. And that's why these more modern therapy techniques of short-term therapy do not change people. They might make you reconcile some sort of dilemma or work on one specific relationship. But unless it informs you from your neurology, from your unconscious, unless you really metabolize it with a transferent object, the unconscious doesn't become conscious. You might talk about things easier, or you might feel more comfortable in a room full of people that you don't know. You know, there's certain things you can reconcile with short-term therapy, but long-term therapy of real deep change comes by virtue of transference. And that involves your unconscious. And so to me, the issue for me was how to find my depths so that, you know, I always thought of myself as perceptive. I always thought of myself as like deep person, you know, like I like that thing, you know, like I always liked the implicit. But being in therapy for years and years and years, and I'm not at the moment, but I was for many, many years, reconciled a tremendous amount of my early life. And I had two parents who adored each other. They liked each other much more than they liked us. And there were four of us. And they were very opinionated, and they were very singular in what they thought about things and how to do them. And, you know, it took me a while to trust my own self and my own opinions, and find my own kind of self-esteem apart from who I was growing up. And I'm also an identical twin. And if you know anything about identical twins, one of the issues is, how do you become your own person? How do you separate without rejecting that aspect of, because being an identical twin is like my life. That's like, it's been the most golden, wonderful, privileged blessing in my life. And, you know, anybody who knows me, how devoted I am to my children, my grandchild, I'm devoted to my friends and my practice, and my work, and blah, blah, blah. But my lens on life, I share with my sister. And that has been, you know, unconditional love.
Yeah. That's beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel so blessed and lucky, no matter what happens.
This episode of the Better Yoga Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Banyan Botanicals. Use the code Kari15 for 15% off their amazing Ayurvedic products. That's KARI 15. Don't forget to use the link in our show notes.
Well, again, that goes back to the goal of yoga and honing that. I mean, really developing that and honing that. How do you help students access and interpret the narratives that are held in their body through movement, through the practice, through breath work?
You know, I really believe in the concept, that Chinese concept of Wu Wei, effortless effort, the effortlessness of riding a bike for transportation and not for riding the bike. The reading, deep reading of fiction also has given me that experience that I've also had in yoga of going deep inside myself and being like, you know, so one of the things that as we're teaching, that when I teach them something new and they are fighting against something in their body that they can't access, that's where a good adjustment comes in. Because if you can give them somebody an experience, if you can, you know, a good adjustment is allowing someone to let go of the investment that they have in how they do it. And if you can allow them to let go of the investment they have and give them an experience that they didn't know they can access, it's like being in space. You know, so I always say to people, you know you're doing the practice right. You know you're doing the pose correctly when you can't feel anything. When you are just in space, when you're not hitting up against or butting up against your limitations, where you can't go, that piece of yourself that you can't access. A good pose, any pose, should be spacious and without sensation.
Yeah.
And so I'm a huge, huge believer in really good teaching instead of cueing. Because if you can't give someone an esoteric experience through the embodiment, then you don't know enough theory. And if you don't have theory, the practice is flat or dangerous.
Yes.
And then without practice, it's, just dry as a bone. So you really need both. And, it's just like yoga. So, the union between the mind, the body, and the breath. And so it's very much the embodiment. We live in this body. It is not made to last, but we're living in it for as long as it can support the mind, and then the mind can change the body. So, it's really important. The physical practice is important to build technique. And the technique that you're building refines your competency. And so it's off the mat too. When you have a good practice, when you learn anything well, that's why it's so important to master lots of things, because it'll give you a sense of competency and self-esteem and mastery that you know how to go somewhere in your body. And then your body becomes this template of liberation. Otherwise, listen, you can have a body, a house that's a pigsty, a hut, a mansion. It's on you, determined by the quality of your practice. And I also want to say about the home practice that it is in the very nature of anything therapeutic. Whether it's therapy or learning how to knit or learning how to swim or learning yoga, it is inherent in the practice to have resistance. It is inherent in anything therapeutic to stay the same. That resistance of, I don't want to go there. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to try and fail. I don't want to do things that are too hard. I don't want to feel this certain way, whatever it is. That's why procrastination and precrastination are just, and they're just one aspect, just one little example of what it is to resist change. But it's only that aspect of getting better at something that changes your neurology. And it has to move through your neurology. It has to move through your unconscious. That's why no one can tell you anything that's going to change you. It has to move through you. And that's why therapeutic techniques, by their nature, take time. So, in all yoga is therapeutic, just like all geometry is sacred because of its nature. All relationships have the capacity for love, all of them. So there's so many universal ideas that we can hook onto and play with individually. And that's why, there's a very specific template for going to therapy, but the goal is personal. Same in yoga. Same in anything.
Yeah, so many thoughts from that download. No, because you're talking about, I'm like, well, here we are again, back at the procrastination before starting a home practice, right? Or like, or my therapist says, like, everybody comes to therapy when their life falls apart, like this huge thing, and they want it to be different, but they don't want to have to change for it to be different. Like, it's that same resistance, right? And it's that iceberg of like, you think you're operating from the peak that's above the water, but it's all operating from the unconscious. And that's, again, the taking time to really uncover that.
You are clearly someone who knows the therapeutic process, and it is a process, like anything. It's sort of like, I love the idea of Wu Wei because that is the implicit that has taken over the explicit effort. That is really what that is. And when you're really, or some people call it like, what are other words for it? Like being in the zone. That is also like Wu Wei. Being
Flow state.
Yeah, a flow state, right. Being so in it that you're not thinking about the technique of doing it. It's become part of your being rather than the doing. And that is the stellar nature. Your third foot, your third hand, your third eye, your tenacity, your capacity to hold it together, and your ability to perceive beyond your observations. So real imagination, or, your third eye is really your brain. Your third hand is not a hand. It's when your two hands come together to create a shape that holds things in containment. That's what the third hand is. The third foot is your tenacity to be here and have an earthly experience of belonging and presence and stability. And like, I'm safe. And who doesn't want any of that? So, but that takes a lot of technique. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of repetition. And, but we give people the recipe. That's why I wrote the home practice book, because there's a recipe in there. You start with something that's proofed and practiced. And so you don't make it up. You start with a template.
Or do it according to how you feel that day.
You don't use your feelings, right? You don't tune yourself to yourself. You tune yourself to something larger than yourself, so that you are participating literally in something larger than you. And we're doing that anyway, but that makes it conscious. Anything you do anyway, you're breathing because you're alive. But when you do it consciously and you train the breath, it becomes incredibly literate, and then you can use it as a tool. Otherwise, the natural breath is emotional.
Right.
And then you're just tuning yourself to yourself. And
then you're just at the whim of your emotions and feelings. You just,
right, which is your nature.
Right. The conundrum, however, to have that wu wei takes a lot of effort to get to that flow state. There's a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of technique, right? Which is why, you always say, learn a lot of things, learn many things.
Yes.
It's going to make you better at everything. Or I guess how Naveen says, if you want one thing, do everything, right? It's just,
that's right. That's
it's
right.
all going to develop.
It's also that phrase is very specific to the embodiment practice, because if you have a shoulder that's fucked up, you don't fix it from where it's wrong. You have to go everywhere else. So you have to do everything. So, you don't tailor make the practice for the limitations. You tailor make the practice for the template. And eventually those small issues reconcile because they're off, because 12 other things are off. And so you look at the whole, you reframe the puzzle instead of pushing in the puzzle piece that popped out. We've said that forever. And that's why you don't fix something from where it's wrong, because the consciousness with which is wrong is not going to be the consciousness with which you're going to fix
it.
Right. So you need technique for everything. And yoga has given me that, because it encompasses so many things: the intellect, the body, the imagination, the breath, the integration of it all, working with other people, having community, getting good at something. And so ritual. So that to me is what a spiritual practice is.
Yeah. I think was it Einstein said, you can't fix a problem on the same level of consciousness that created it. Right.
Yes. And my very favorite quote is from Louis Pasteur. And he said, in the field of observation, chance favors the prepared mind. I'll say it again. In the field of observation, chance favors the prepared mind. So learn lots of things, know lots of techniques, because you're going to be able to transfer skills onto something else that, you'll be, a life of learning lots of things and being good at several of them is what gives your life synchronicity. It is not random. It is not luck. Synchronicity comes because of the work you've done to prepare for it.
I love that.
That's where insight happens. That's what insight is. It's that, I get it.
So you had a career as a documentary filmmaker before yoga?
I did.
Okay. And so how has that experience influenced your approach to teaching and storytelling? Because you talk a lot about your personal narrative,
Mhm.
right? And so talking about a lot of different techniques, like how do you have that, the creativity, the psychoanalysis, the documentary filmmaking, that storytelling, how does that come in? Because your classes are transformative for everybody, right? For everybody. And if you have not gone to the studio in New York City, like run and go there. Everyone, I mean, it's such a sense of community of, you know, and I know you've said, you learn the most from your students. Everyone is so talented, and it's really like a workshop style, and you're there in the room. Like you said, like, why go to a class where you're just being led by a teacher and not seen or not given that
Right.
experience of losing your investment of how you hold it together, right? It's like, and it's just an amazing sense.
Well, the whole, so I want to answer that in a couple of ways. The first thing, and let me go back to the first part of your question, which is how it's not even so much that the filmmaking informed my yoga. It is me pulling out another aspect of myself. Like I loved filmmaking because I got to wear all of these hats.
Mm-hmm.
I got to be the director, and I got to be the producer, and I got to be the camera person. I got to learn what good sound is. And I got to really learn, like, you have to have an open mind. You can't make a decision about how your film's going to turn out, especially when you're making a documentary, when you have all this going on in front of the camera that is so surprising. And you're just discovering things by trying to explore an issue.
Well, that's how you teach, Abbie. That's like being in your room as a teacher.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
So it's me that's doing all these things, but everything will inform you. Everything informed me. Like I came to documentary filmmaking because I was studying with Margaret Mead at Barnard, and I had a work study job in college, and it was to follow her around with a video camera. And one day she turned to me and she said, forget anthropology. And also anthropology was not kind to her. She was very controversial. And the reason she was controversial was that, anthropology is a science. It's a social science, but it is a science. And the way that she got her material was that she would go to primitive societies and she would wear their clothes and sit in their circles with the children and the moms. She would wear their outfits. She would participate in rituals. And the rest of her colleagues were incredibly critical of this, that is not science. You broke the fourth wall. A scientist studies from a much more observable and objective point of view. And she found that she would get better, more intimate, more meaningful material if she became of them. And she was really kind of, in our world, like she was canceled by her colleagues. And I was part of the larger department of Columbia and Barnard were together at that point of the anthropology department. And she was not well liked. And she was also not well liked because she was a difficult person. And, but she turned to me one day and she said, get out of academia, because academia is not going to give you what you in particular, I see, are after. Because I had a camera all the time, answering questions and blah, blah. And she said, quit, like now, quit. And I was a sophomore at the time. She said, quit and take a year off and go make a film and then come back to me. And I did.
Wow.
I found that was 1975. The boat people, the refugees from Vietnam, were coming over. The war was now over. And all the boat people were coming over. And I found a community of 5 families who were living in a tenement building in Jersey City, New Jersey. And I convinced these people to let me move in with them and stand in the corner. And one of the families, and so the rich family, there was a rich family who lived upstairs. And then consecutively, with the caste system, the poor people lived on the bottom. And the rich family learned English right away because they had the money to buy TVs. And they learned right away. So I worked with them because they could understand me. And then they would come to the lower levels of this tenement and they would translate for me. And so I really got to know a lot about their food culture and their language and their, the daily life. And I made a film about this family with 13 children. And I just would sit with them. I'd eat with them. I'd sit in the corner for hours. They forgot about me. And so I made this film. I brought it back to her. I hired an editor to play with me with it. It was called the Font, PHAN. That was their family name. It was called the Fonts of Jersey City. And it opened up the very first Margaret Mead Film Festival at the Natural History Museum.
Amazing.
And then from that film, I got every grant, because that's how we made films in those days, to make every other film after that I made. And it was at that point, and then I went back to college and finished my degree. And that's really, and I just did what she said. I would do anything she said to me. And so she really taught me about filmmaking, even though she didn't know anything about it. But she really taught me how to make a film. And that was how to be a filmmaker, how to make something, how to use your imagination, how to make contact with other people, how to be, so essentially she taught me how to be a yoga teacher.
Right.
So whatever doesn't come naturally to you, I had to have a technique. And so, I didn't have some of the things that I now feel that I've achieved. Part of it was I learned it from teachers that were great. And part of it, I learned it from my twin sister, who naturally had things I didn't have. We're like mirror twins. So like I'm a lefty and she's a righty. And, her part was on this side, my part was on the other side in our hair. And I was a terrible sleeper and she was a great sleeper. And, we were very, that's why I really understand what polarity is. It's not opposites. It's opposite sides of the same pole, right? It's not, you don't have one without the other. So, I learned a tremendous amount from what I didn't have that my sister had and vice versa. And what she had was like a tremendous amount of empathy for other people. She was a natural friend. I was not. I was really good in school. I got good grades. I loved going to school. I loved math. I loved geometry. I loved English. I loved literature. I loved learning. That was great. I didn't have much of a social life. So, we taught each other. We gave each other things. And then like everybody I learned from, it was important to me. And now I really think like being a part of community, something larger than yourself, is everything.
Well, you've created an amazing community with the studio.
Thank you. It's like my life's work, honestly. But everything I've done up until that point, I considered my life's work.
Yeah.
It's like when I tell everybody this decade was my best, but then I had the next decade, and that was my 60s were the best. I turned 70 2 weeks ago. I hope it's as good as my 60s. But I said that also about my 50s. Because, every decade also, just because of your hormones, is going to pull out aspects of yourself that you didn't know you were going to experience. I'm sure you can see that. Your decades of like, I'm looking at your trajectory. What little I know of it, huge. Each decade that you've moved through.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's like different lives. I think the trajectory is just like, you know, um, absolutely. And now your grandchild is your greatest work, the culmination of your greatest work.
Also, the way my grandchild was conceived, the best. So, my daughter's a lesbian.
Mhm.
And she married Rachel, who's like amazing. And my daughter she's a very earthy person. And she was destined to become a mother. And she's a very gifted therapist because of her nature. She also studied it, but her nature was like, I always knew she was going to be a therapist. And she wanted to have a baby. And when she and my sister went to see a doctor before she got pregnant, just to make sure everything was in working order, plumbing's got to work. He said, and if you look behind me, I have everything you need. I have all of these notebooks full of donors, and you can read about who they are and pick one. And she said, oh, no. I want to know the spirit of the person that I am connecting with, like biologically, to create a person. Like, why would I take it from a notebook? And he looked at her like she had 5 heads. But she ended up with the donor who's one of our students, who my children have gotten to know through yoga. And it happened at the yoga studio. So, he lived downtown, she lived uptown. So that he said, why don't we just meet at the yoga studio really early in the morning? They did. He went into the bathroom, and then passed it to Rachel. And then they got this little, what's that called? Like a turkey baster.
Turkey baster.
She got up on blocks, like she knows how to do. And blonde Alex, Sherry, happened to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Class. She put Emma's legs up the wall, and gave her a few adjustments, kept her there for 30 minutes, and then said to Emma, I think you're pregnant. And she was. He said, no, the yoga story.
It's another yoga story, and another reason why the studio is your life's work.
Yes, absolutely.
To continue your next project.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's amazing. That actually speaks to my question of how do you integrate yoga principles into your everyday life outside the studio?
There you go. And everything you do informs every other thing you do. So you're doing it anyway, on and off the mat, because you pull it out of yourself. So you're always pulling material out of yourself. That's why yoga poses show things, because you're pulling it out of you. So in the same way, you're you on the mat, you're you off the mat. You can tell how people do things. You can tell how people swim, right? How they kick, stroke, and breathe. How they do yoga, right?
Or don't. They just stroke and breathe.
That's right. And if you're not kicking,
Right?
believe me,
Yeah.
it's going to show. Right. So everything you do informs every other thing you do. There's nothing that I do in yoga that is not part of my life. I can't think of anything that, part of what I learned filmmaking, part of what I learned teaching Hebrew school, part of what I learned being a documentary filmmaker, studying psychoanalysis. Like, there's nothing that I've done that hasn't informed my teaching of yoga. Nothing. I can't think of anything, because it's not about the techniques. It's about me doing the techniques. It's like when people say to me things like, oh, I pulled my hamstring doing yoga, so I stopped doing it. Or, uh,
Yeah. Yoga hurt my neck or hurt my shoulder.
right. It's not yoga. It's you doing yoga. You can hurt yourself playing golf, right? It's like, it's your technique. So always be curious about your technique rather than how you can fix yourself. And so curiosity and imagination has to be a part of anything that's going to be reconciled or used in an authentic way, or, or creating yourself as a dimensional whole person. Because if you don't have that, you don't have the tools to be able to reconcile not just an injury, a dilemma. Like, how am I going to find an apartment? And how am I going to find the right person to love? And like all of that, it's all the same. That's why we like the magic square, Kari, right?
Right. Love it. And when you were talking, Abby, you were like, there's nothing in my life that that doesn't inform the yoga. And I was literally like, because you're such an integrated, well-rounded person, right? And you just said that.
Right.
Again, whether it's Magic Square or Integrated Stitch or, the Wraps of Rapture, it's like everything you've done is woven into everything else. It's not segmented or disjointed or, dumped on. It's everything. And just as some final thoughts, I know that you've mentored countless students over the years. You've brought them in. I mean, it's a great business model. You make great teachers being their mentor. What do you find most rewarding about being a teacher?
The relationships. There's nothing nothing like it. It's the kind of intimacy that really comes from informing someone well, having learned from them. We learn in relation with others. I don't spit things out and have them take it in. You really have to metabolize it. And it's the relationship that I have with people that makes that possible and that informs me as well. I have become a better teacher, a better person, a more informed individual. I've recently found new people to mentor, and they both have something really specific and compelling to me. And I might not be able to articulate that, although I'm a talker, so I'm going to try. One of them has a real solid foundation for who she is. Like I don't even know if she's aware of it, but she's a really, what's the word? She's a really substantial human being with a thick skin and a curious mind and a competent practice and someone who just wants to soak up the material and can articulate herself well enough to have a relationship with me. And I so appreciate that. And our relationship is growing. So that's one. The other one, I find him really compelling because he's got a beautiful practice and a really lovely way of interacting with other people. And so when I find some nugget of something really special, I want to teach that person. And I was just in Zurich for a week teaching, and there was this one person. I had a room, 40 people, all different ages, from all different countries, because Zurich is a real hub, like New York is. And there was this one woman who I noticed interacted with everybody around her, had a lovely practice, had a beautiful way of expressing herself. And I was so drawn to her. And so it just takes some special nugget that I can relate to that feeds me while feeding them. And it is always a beautiful two-way street. And you have to like the person. There's not many people that I meet these days that I can't find someone to like.
What's next for you in the studio? Are there projects or anything that you want to share that's coming up people can tap into?
In-person workshops, in-person trainings. I mean, I feel like we're still coming down from the pandemic. So more in-person things. We're just starting. My first 10 hours is going to be home practice at the in February, early February, and then Ty's going to do one on restorative yoga, and then someone else is going to do one on meditation, then someone else. Being in person with things is going to be a beautiful thing. And I love our Zoom immersions. Love them because they get so in depth. Like we're doing one right now on the 5-element theory, seen through the lens of face reading. And so I love how to go deep, 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 deep. But I also love in person, just by its nature, gets much deeper, quicker, faster, because you really get to touch everybody and, have that intimacy. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And we are also coming out with a new website, which will be really beautiful. And the more closely I work with Sophia, who's our manager and really my partner, the better the studio runs, the more successful we are. And we just have this lovely relationship of this give and take. And, I am 40 years older than most of the people I work with. And I'm finding that so rich. And as you know, being an old person in a young person's world, well, there's a lot to learn. And I rely on them. And, it's not just the technology, it's not just the technology, or that's the obvious one. It's like, how do I find this app? It's like
It's a language. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
That's why I have Tiger.
That's right. That's right. You need those young people who are right. But it isn't only that. But I also know it's a lens on our culture that I don't have. I have a lens on my culture, and I love getting old, and I love having students my age. But there's something also to be said. I think social media is the best because you can do so much. You can do a lot of fucked up things, but you can also do a lot of beautiful things. And it really bugs me when people say, oh, social media, say it's not really good. You know, people are in their screens too much. It's like, hoo ha. But, you know, forget that. If you focus on what can be really beautiful about it, all of a sudden, everything's open source. Everything's available to us. We can look, we've got these like amazing European students who we'd never have without it. Social media is like, I always ask people, how do you come to our studio? If I don't know them, how'd you come to us? It's the first question I ask people besides what's your name and what would you like me to know about you? I always ask, how'd you find us? And a lot of them say Instagram. And like, I'm so grateful. That's amazing. Right. So social media has really opened up our world. And I so appreciate that. And so there's lots of things that I learned from young people that I would never know on my own. And so I love the diversity of ages. That to me, we have so much to teach each other. The diversity
Yes.
of ages, the diversity of culture, the diversity of experience. And so it takes everything to make a community, everything. So yeah, I'm grateful.
It's all the layers, right? It's like the 5 families in the tenement, the 3 floors of your house, the different decades and the different generations, like
Yes,
XYZ, millennials, all of, all of them.
that's right. I love it
All
all.
right, we ask everyone the last question. If you weren't doing this, what would you, I know you've had many different careers, but what else could you see yourself doing?
So everything that I've done, I can see myself doing. Like I could have been a rabbi. That would have been so good. An academic, a scholar, so fun. I could have kept being a filmmaker because I loved every second of it. I could have been a psychoanalyst because that is just like really where my brain goes. And I love the implicit. So I could have done all of these things that I've done. I love what those things didn't have that yoga has, is the embodiment part of it, which I truly love. And so, I also could have been a singer because there's so much about that has, my kids all sing. Our whole family sings. It's the one thing I had really in common with my husband was that we were both singers. And I have to say that when you sing, you really lose your inhibitions. It brings you to the implicit. And that's why for me, that's like very special. And so I could have done that too. So I can see myself doing lots of things. But I have to say, as you get older and you use different pieces of yourself and express all the 5 elements, for example, of your earthiness, of your woodiness, go, of your metal nature, refine and polish, right? Of your fire
Water.
nature, your water nature, your depths. As you use all of that, you realize that you become a whole person. When you can see yourself doing lots of things, you're a whole person.
That's an amazing, that's mic drop right there. Abbie, thank you so much. This has been so fun for me. So fun. Thrilled for all that you have going on. So much nachas you have in your life. It's so nice. Congratulations, Mazel Tov on everything. And I really want to get down to New York City. Everyone listening, go to the studio. She is the rabbi. She's the singer. She's the conductor. She's the storyteller, the filmmaker of her classes. It's really an extraordinary thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was so fun.
Oh, good.
Great questions. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. Don't forget to check out our 2-week free trial for unlimited yoga, breathwork, and Ayurveda on betteryoga.net.